Hi, and welcome to another episode of Silver Goose Farm Stories, the Homestead Headlines for January 27th, 2023. I'm your host, Mama Goose. I hope everybody had a great Happy New Year and all of the holidays leading up to it, of course. It's been pretty quiet here on the farm for the most part because we've had a series of rainy days and stormy weather that have really kept everyone indoors for the most part. But just this last couple of weeks, the storm clouds have kind of dissipated and things have been picking up again, specifically things that have to do with our pigs. So the last couple of days have been centered around butchering the last of our little junior pigs and, unfortunately, our boar. If you follow us on our blog, I made a post about castration and the reasons why you would do that. And obviously, if you are breeding, at least one of your males has to remain intact. And for us, that was our boar, Inigo. We got him at 6 months old, and he quickly earned his position among the swine herd by pushing his way to the top of the pecking order and then impregnating all of our sows so that we had 3 litters that farrowed last summer. So fast forward to today, he is full grown, or he was full grown, and he started displaying some increasingly more aggressive behavior, mainly just to the other pigs. But there was just a lot of hollering and screaming on the part of the sows and the other females, and on his part, a lot of tossing little pigs out of the way and biting anyone that got in between him and his food, and just chasing everybody away and doing very aggressive displays of dominance. It wasn't too disturbing, I guess, because it was very much centrally located to the pig pen, and he was always pretty mild-mannered around anybody else. But then he started bristling his back hair whenever my husband was around, and he was generally okay with me, or at least it seemed like he didn't consider me to be a threat to his dominance. But whenever my husband came near the pen, which was often because my husband does the majority of the animal chores, Inigo would actually ignore his meal, which is kind of unusual for a pig. And he would just walk the fence line, keeping an eye on my husband with his back hairs just standing up on end. So a few days after our second sow farrowed, right in the middle of the storm, as was predicted from our last podcast, my husband was in the pig pen checking on the mama pigs and their babies, cleaning out water bowls and refilling their separate troughs because they're still sort of staying apart from the other pigs. And apparently, Inigo took that as a direct threat and just charged my husband out of nowhere. Thankfully, he missed, but he did happen to graze my husband's leg with one of his tusks that had been starting to come in. And so we did have a bit of a scratch, but thankfully it wasn't like direct broken skin. And while Inigo was backing up to charge for a second time, my husband took that opportunity to jump right out of that pen. Of course, this was an immediate no. We have zero tolerance for aggressive animals on our farm, especially around because we have so many little children, both my kids and their friends that come on our property frequently. And at over 200 pounds and with incoming tusks and all, Inigo could literally kill someone. I mean, we don't even accept an aggressive rooster. So you can imagine what our feelings were about an animal that could, actually kill somebody. And that was a tragedy that we were not going to wait around for. So thankfully that week, a couple days after this incident with my husband, some of our friends came over and they culled him. So there's a question of what to do with boar meat because it has a taint or a gamey smell to it that can be off-putting or even make the meat inedible depending on how sensitive someone is to the meat and depending on how much of that smell or that sort of like testosterone-induced smell that your particular animal has. And so our initial thoughts was that this would just end up being dog food. But my father-in-law swears he can't smell it. So he's going to attempt to make some sausage with it. Since a heavily spiced like preparation of the meat can be quite forgiving to any like flavors or smells that are naturally in something. I do think that I will still pass on tasting it though, because even if no one else can taste it, I'm still super sensitive to food smells compared to the rest of the family. I always have been. And it only takes one kind of nasty experience and it takes me a really long time to get over it. You know, food memories and all that. Anyway, so prior to his culling, however, Inigo had also ripped through the gate to his pen, literally smashing the wood planking off of the door, and went and mated with all the little females that we had intentionally kept separate from him because we didn't want them to be bred, and they were also too young, and they were also his daughters. Although, you know, like inbreeding or line breeding, as they say, for animals isn't necessarily an issue for a certain number of generations. I can get into that if there's some interest, but anyway, so it was just not an ideal situation, but thankfully all these pigs had been spoken for in terms of processing, and so we just kind of bumped up the schedule and had everyone come and process their pigs earlier than anticipated, or take their pigs home earlier than anticipated, because their gestation periods are so short, and I didn't want 50 piglets running around on our farm, no matter how cute they are. That's just insane. In other news, I took the last couple of days to bring out my seed boxes for the first time this year. I had been feeling super indifferent and burned out by the garden prep, like work, all of the digging and soil amendments and all that sort of thing. I've been putting off and procrastinating terribly with it, just because the idea of picking up a shovel or a wheelbarrow or something like is just the last thing I want to do right now. My energy levels have been so down, and while I'm loving the rain, I can't really do a whole bunch of outside work in it. There's a ton left to do to prep for spring, but I'd sort of been secondhand shamed or called out by the PG&E guy who came to help with the last bit of work needed for our solar panels. And so as he was walking past all of our empty garden beds with my husband to the main breaker box line or whatever you call it, he tells my husband, "For preppers, you guys sure don't have a lot growing." And my husband said to him, "Well, we have onions and garlic in the beds right now." To which the guy responded, "Can't really make a meal out of that, can you?" And I felt thoroughly judged, even though it's winter and not everyone does a winter garden. And come on, this guy doesn't know me or our farm, and I don't know if he knows anything about gardening. But I just sort of felt like I was being called out as a lousy farmer, and I took such offense to that. So I kind of used that as motivation for me to take out my seed boxes, because I'm going to show this stranger, this PG&E guy that I'm probably never going to see again in my life, that, you know, I'm going to start growing something. It's funny how we internalize like these people's opinions that don't really have any standing in our life, and all the like positive affirmation that my husband can give me can get kind of knocked down by one external like thoughtless comment made. But that's probably just a me problem. But anyway, so I took out my seed boxes and opened them up for the first time, and just going through and pulling out all the cold hardy plants for early planting, and thinking about all of the later spring and summer plants that could grow, like all that potential fertility, I guess, all that potential beautiful growth in the garden and production, like really made me happy and excited about the garden and about farming for the first time in a while. So yesterday I kind of raked out some of the garden beds and I planted some carrots and peas, cilantro, a bunch of brassicas and lettuce in the garden. And then plus I just sort of threw out anything that could benefit from cold stratification, because I cannot tell you how many seeds I've forgotten or lost in our fridge trying to start those seeds indoors. But also, I've also found that whatever gets direct sown in the garden just seems to do better. It doesn't get the transplant shock or the danger of being root bound or stunted, and also doesn't depend on me to have to remember to like baby it, like have a little bit more sun exposure and have a little bit more wind exposure, and then now you can move into the big pot. Like, it doesn't need to do that because it just found its roots and grew in the place where the seed was dropped. And because they've survived the elements and endured the winter, and they just end up being hardier plants. Of course, with this method, my germination success rate is a lot lower than if I'm starting seeds in trays. So I end up just liberally sprinkling seeds across the whole bed rather than attempting to make neat rows of anything. And my plan is, since this is really the first time that I'm doing this kind of like laissez-faire, willy-nilly planting, direct sowing, is that I'll just sort of thin out the plants as they come up, because I get, microgreens and sprouts are also beneficial, nutritious, and that way we'll be able to not let everything go to waste. Like, it's still going to be eaten, it's still going to be used. It'll just be another part of the growing process. I also started some perennials in the greenhouse. Some of the more unusual things that I've collected and wanted to experiment with, and whatever like needed a bit more time to germinate or like its own pot so that I could separate it and label it and not forget just what in the world it was. So alongside artichokes and asparagus, I've got New Jersey tea bushes, passion flowers, some baby blue eucalyptus, and cedars of Lebanon, because I've always wanted to have a grove of trees and point to them and say, here are my cedars of Lebanon, which she planted. I know, it's just me. There's still a whole bunch of outside work that needs to be done that I will grumble through, but I'm hoping we'll get to it in the next month or so. I'm always looking forward to pruning, but soil amendments and setting up new trellises and high hoops, and that just seems really daunting at the moment, but I'm sure it'll be very invigorating and fulfilling once I get my butt outside. And definitely, like, starting that first set of seeds seems to have broken through my normal, like, grumpy melancholy, and so hopefully this will be like a positive progression from here. We had some really big ravines that were made in our driveway from all the water runoff of the last few days of weeks of rain, actually, and so we finally got them filled in, and I don't feel like I'm going to snap an axle in my car driving up the hill. We still have to re-gravel it, and that requires a bit of saving, because who knew that gravel was so expensive? I don't think I've ever had such an appreciation for rock aggregate in my entire life, but that's just the nature of farm life, I guess. Anyway, that's about it for the update on the homestead. Thank you so much for sitting through my rambling and your patience with my storytelling mishaps. We always appreciate you taking that time to listen to us. And if you'd like to know more about our farm, you can visit us on our website at silvergoosefamilyfarm.com, or on our Instagram, the same handle, Silver Goose Family Farm. You can also email us any questions or comments at silvergoosefamily@gmail.com. We really appreciate hearing from everybody, and yeah, thank you so much again. I hope to be back with you soon, probably with more interesting stuff. Thanks. Bye.